everyone. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at Times Higher Education, and thank you for joining us for this THE and Digital Ed webinar, Futureproofing STEM Courses to Create World-Class Teaching, Digital Teaching and Learning. We've got together a panel today of higher education leaders from across the UK, and also Christina Pediculakis, President and Chief Operating Officer of Digital Ed, is joining us as well. We've got a lot to get through in the hour, and there's a lot to discuss with this topic. It's been evidenced by the strong response we've had for the panel and also the many number of people who've registered to join us today. So I'd like to get things moving by starting right away by talking about what opportunities there are for new ways to study STEM subjects with digital and blended learning. There's been a raft of innovation in the sector since March. There's been a really strong response. And I think it would be great to open this up to the panel if people can perhaps tell us a little bit about what's going on at their institution. So, Amy, can I come to you first? Do you tell us a bit about, if you could just tell us your institution before you begin, that'd be great, thanks.
Okay, so I work at Aston University. I'm part of the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. We've got a kind of college-wide approach to, we've brought into the Digital Ed's Mobius courseware. So we're looking into exploring that and how we can embed that into the different modules across the different areas of the college. From my particular department, so I work within the Engineering and Physical Sciences Foundation Year programme. We've also invested in the Labster simulation software. This has been really useful in terms of pre and post COVID and the shift to online teaching. It's a nice bit of kit because it gives students kind of the real world context behind why they're doing particular experiments as well. So that's been quite nice to use. So the transition from pre-COVID to online teaching has been quite smooth because we'd already had some experience with this previously.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Michael, perhaps I'd come to you next. Do you tell us a little about what's happening at King's and what the transition period has been like for you there?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Culling. I'm the Vice Dean Education in the Faculty of Natural and Mathematical Sciences at King's. So we have 5 departments in our faculty. I myself am a computer scientist, so I teach in the computer science department. That's my main teaching first-hand experience. And of course, like everyone else, of course, we did change to online teaching, like we all had to. We're using Microsoft Teams as the main platform for the main delivery of the live sessions. We use a lot of recorded content that we distribute via a learning management system and a number of other interactive platforms. And to address the question, sort of a bit more generally about what opportunities there are in the new ways. Of course, with the new technologies, the real game changer is the interaction technologies and in being able to go 2 ways. So distribution technology has existed for a long time. You could already, so remote learning has existed for a long time. You could get VHS videos from the Open University in the 80s. So it's not a new idea to study remotely, but for a long time it's been one way. And in the earlier days of the internet, it's been one way. Then there have been in the last decade, certainly especially sort of in my field in programming education, there have been MOOCs, massive online examples, but they are mostly one-way delivery. With all the large-scale digital remote delivery platforms previously, typically less than 3% of the people who start a course finish a course. So it's nice to roll things out in a very big way, but it's not actually very successful on an individual user basis with very sort of casual interaction. And so the real game changer in more recent technologies is to be able to have actual engagement and interaction, and that is now to a certain extent possible. And while it's still not the same as actually being on campus, and we can talk about that in more detail later in where the limitations lie, it is a big step forward to what we did even just a handful of years ago. And so that is, I think, where it's interesting to talk a bit more about it, the ways in which we can now create engagement with students.
So I could build on what Michael said, if that's okay, Alistair.
Please do, thank you.
Hanifa Shah, I'm the PVC Exec Dean of a faculty that covers computing, engineering and the built environment. And so these are very much practice-based, very practical subjects. And I think the research has shown that we need to change the models really of what we're basing our learning on, moving much more towards ideas from gaming, online laboratory experiments and real-time formative assessment, and just things that will encourage both deeper conceptual understanding and enhancing creativity and imagination and problem-solving skills. So I think before even COVID, we were starting to move more and more towards our students working on real problems in partnership with industry, with the public sector, with the third sector organisations and the community. And I think really what the opportunity in the online environment is to extend the virtual laboratories, the collaborative projects, whether that's with external partners, whether that's with our own research groups, etc. And I think it's actually the technology is probably less of a barrier now than it's ever been before. I agree with what Michael says. I think it's going to be these new models and how we integrate them, the teaching, the pedagogy, the instruction models, and how we then integrate them into what the new technology allows us to do.
Great, thank you. Catherine, you'd like to add something to that?
Yeah, really good points. I think I'm institutional lead for learning and teaching at Leeds Trinity, and we're really new to computer science. We're in our third year of running it. It was a course that we designed in response to a significant skills gap in the Leeds City region, and we worked really closely with industry to develop it. We're also using Microsoft Teams as our main platform for delivery. And one of the things that that's enabled is actually made it easier for us to bring industry into the classroom. Using that tool, there's no longer a travel to campus. We can actually connect with anybody from anywhere. So in the last few weeks, our computer science staff have run a careers mini-con with guest speakers, but also had the students presenting. So, it's freed that up for us. But I think it's not just about the platforms, it's about the environment you provide for students. It's about the learning materials, and it's the way you engage with them, and getting that two-way process and sense of community is really fundamental.
Thank you. Amy, I saw you raised your hand in Zoom. If you can, like to add on to that.
It's just around kind of using Microsoft Teams as the platform. So within Aston, we don't actually use Microsoft Teams as the main platform for teaching. We use Blackboard Collaborate. But within the Engineering and Physical Sciences Foundation programme, we've actually been trialling the Microsoft Teams as something to encourage group work and for personal tutoring. And we found that that's actually been really, really good for encouraging engagement with students and being able to basically kind of give a more informal context to them being able to communicate with us. We've had a lot more interaction with them in terms of them just being easily able to send individual kind of messages to us rather than having to go through the formality of email. And compared to this time last year, the engagement levels are considerably higher. So it's been quite nice having that access to something like Microsoft Teams.
Okay, thank you. Neil, if I can just bring you in at this point sorry, Anthony, I'll come to you after this, thanks. Just to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing at the University of York in the computer science department there. You're on mute, sorry.
I'm Neil Audley, I'm head of department of computer science, and we've actually been doing sort of online stuff for quite a while now. So in some ways COVID came as a complete shock, but in other ways we were relatively cognizant of the sort of the issues, because we've recently started online MSCs, but we've also been doing virtual labs for quite a few years now, and that was largely to get around access issues into labs, so students could actually get 24/7 access. It doesn't work for everything. It's difficult to virtualize a soldering iron and other practical things, and I think that's the, without repeating what colleagues have already said, I think we're starting now to push the edges of what is possible in a virtual world in STEM. And that's, I think, talking to colleagues around the sciences faculty, the issues are around how do you do hard physical experiments in labs and give students the same sort of experience certainly students that have started in a face-to-face world, maybe last year, or they've just come from sixth form college, they're expecting to be able to get into labs, to be able to do things with test tubes and stuff. And it's how you replicate that, I think, is going to be the real challenge going forward. And I don't think we've really got the answers at the moment. Okay, thank you. Anatoly, you're Director of Distance Learning at program at King's. You're a colleague of Michael's. With that being your focus, how big is the challenge ahead? I mean, how much is there still to be done in order to refine the distance learning model, do you think?
Thank you. My name is Anatoly Markiu. I'm Director of Distance Learning Programs and Academic Lead for Technology Enhanced Learning, as Alistair already said. With the constant improvement in communication technologies, we can, with the 4G and now 5G, we changing our distance learning programs and making them more blended, and also introducing high flex type of education when you have students sitting on campus and online at the same time, because that there's no lack in communication. They can communicate in real time, but they can take this communication online and continue with them. The biggest challenge is to introduce labs and a real practical experience, because we can invite students to the campus for a short period of time, or use take-home labs, but it's not the same as you would spend all the time in the laboratory and practice various experiments. But with the high flex and with the development in 5G technologies, we can do remote labs. We can have robots doing experiment, but students can operate those robots from home. So they can get real results, and then they can operate that results, engage with their lecturer or tutor, discuss these results, and they go to different level of education, which everything is real. There's no difference between distance and face-to-face. Everything becomes high flex, blended education.
Okay, thank you very much. Christina, can I bring you in at this point, just because I think you have perhaps a unique perspective as an industry supplier. You know, obviously DigitalEd has a number of university partners across the sector and across the country. And I'm aware that you put sort of lessons and interactive learning and assessment at the heart of what you offer. So to the points that have already been raised, I mean, are there general trends that you see in the direction of travel in terms of how people have already moved to modernise since March and what they're planning to do next?
Yes, thank you. The comments that have been made actually does reflect very much what we've seen. The idea of blended learning is something that was always been at the heart of what we've been thinking about technology, and how do we engage a student from an interactive perspective when they're by themselves, when they have the independent asynchronous learning aspects of their day-to-day, versus taking the opportunity to engage with a professor or with other students to really explore the depths of the concepts that they're learning in an independent way. The technology really allows us to do things like immediate feedback, which is where the real benefit of being face-to-face lies in. So all this technology that we have in terms of labs, what we can do with future work with VR, there are a lot of wonderful ideas that are coming from there. All of those elements are the types of things that we're thinking about from the technology. And what I'm hearing from everyone is that everyone's embracing it. And the path that's going forward is, how do we allow a student to chart the path that best fits them and get the immediate feedback so that they can know that, okay, I actually do understand that concept. Because within STEM, everything is so complex and layered that if they miss one basic foundation, they may start losing what gets layered on top of that. So that's really what we want to look at, and have that independent path for them.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the panel if there are now more opportunities. Oh, sorry, Michael, you had your hand raised. Please go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. One quick point to add maybe is that for me, the observation is that the activities fall really very distinctly into two groups, and one that works really well, and one that remains challenging. You know, the things that work really well is just the delivery of the subject content. is really not a problem at all. So the actual subject content, the theory that they need to learn, the concepts, the what was traditional, the lecture delivery, we deliver now in small chunk recorded videos. So where we had a 2-hour lecture before, we now have 6, 7, 8 videos of 10, 15 minutes with the same content. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, our feedback shows that students often prefer that because it has a whole list of advantages. They can watch it in smaller chunks. They can watch it in their own time at a time of their choosing. They can get subtitles. Foreign language students, can get the subtitles or transcripts. You can rewind, you can stop, and so there's a whole number of advantages. That is actually quite easy. And even some reflection tasks that you want to put in, because we don't see the students really while they're studying. So we put in, after every few videos, a task that we get students to do online in our learning management system that is automatically marked or sort of great, some feedback, whether it's correct or not. That is also actually quite straightforward, and that works quite well. There's technology that can do this. And that is the interesting thing, is that even though we move very much, we did a big jump forward in use of these techniques, we will certainly retain some of that even when COVID is over. They are useful. But then there is the other side, and that is, well, Neil has mentioned one problematic area, that's labs. As Anatoly pointed out, in some areas you can have labs remotely. In some other areas, you can't really get the same experience. A chemistry lab, you can't have a wet lab really at home. In our university, in engineering, we try a whole combination of things. We have a lab at home program where we send out kit to students. We also have virtual labs and things, but that remains a challenge. But the main thing is actually the interaction of students with each other, the actual work. Everyone who knows anything about learning theory knows that students don't learn by me just talking at them. That actually is, that just lays the groundwork for learning then to happen following on from that. But learning is not listening to someone talk. Learning is actually an active, action that a student must take. And especially in STEM subjects, very often that includes interaction. The group work is really important. The experience that students have interacting in sort of semi-professional groups around their subject is really formative. So the years that they have at university, they don't only learn the subject knowledge, they grow up as people by learning to work in a group and having roles and taking leadership and learning about interaction in their subject contents and so on. And that actually does suffer, so there we have to be conscious. And so if we think about how we move forward after COVID, some of the things we will certainly go back on campus. It's not a perfect replacement. It's an emergency solution where we can get by, and it is sort of acceptable, but it is a poorer version of a face-to-face experience. And so it's really interesting to sort these things apart, where we actually win and where it's a sort of emergency solution that we do just because we have to.
Okay, great, thanks. Got a few raised hands. We go to Amy and then Hanifa and then Catherine after that. Just to Amy, go ahead, please.
So in terms of the kind of student interaction, we've actually had quite a positive experience. So like you've mentioned, we deliver a lot of the content asynchronously so they can engage with it flexibly. So the taught sessions, the online live sessions are very much tutorials, and they're very student-led. So they are interacting, they're doing activities either in breakout rooms or as a cohort within that session. They're adding their kind of ideas into the chat, and we discuss those as well. So actually we've had quite nice dynamic engagements with students that way. And you mentioned obviously things around the group work side of things. So previously I touched upon using Microsoft Teams. We've actually had really positive experience with that as well. So we set up teams and then had individual channels within there for groups to work on project work. And they have been engaging really well. They'll be setting up video calls. They've used it as a way of, all editing their projects in one as one and having those discussions around it. So there are ways to have a more positive experience when it comes to getting students to be able to interact with each other and interact with us as tutors. obviously that, you know, it isn't going to be as ideal as being face to face, and, you know, you can't gauge things as well as, you know, you would in a physical setting. And that's going to be one of the things that's kind of impacted is, you know, students' mental well-being and being able to network and create friendships, because that's just as big a part of university and their experience is, you know, these interactions with each other as well as the content being taught. So I think that is one of the challenges that we need to kind of get around, making sure that they have these possibilities to get together to talk. I mean, within our college, we've actually set up this year to have timetabled personal tutoring sessions, where we have small numbers of students get together with us as tutors. You know, you've got the camera on, they can see your face. Yes, you'll have kind of a structured content as to what you're discussing in that particular session, but then they've got that ability to talk to each other, to answer kind of questions that they're, you know, worried about or queries that they have. And it's not just on you as a tutor to have those answers, but the students are actually providing the answer to these students as well, which has been really lovely to see. So, you know, there are possibilities to make an environment for them that is interactive, engaging, and they're getting the support that they need.
Great, thanks. I mean, I think just to put it in a bit of context in terms of the reporting THE's done since March, I think STEM's quite an interesting case because it's the area that gets cited over and over again when we talk about skill shortages and things like that. But also STEM students are no different to any other type of students in that they need the sort of the interpersonal skills that you need in order to join the workforce and be effective there. And also even before that, as you say, learning from each other, learning as part of a group. So the challenge to teach soft skills is one that's felt campus-wide and cohort-wide, but there's possibly an extra layer there with STEM, because I think if you're dealing with perhaps some of the most employable graduates that you're going to produce, they are also going to need those skills for the workplace, and a workplace that's changing all the time. So, sorry, Hanifa, we come to you next, and then Catherine after that.
I completely agree with Amy. Those are excellent points. We did have quite a lot of student presence on campus during semester one. We did a combination of online and blended, and every student had the chance to be on campus at least every other week for some of their classes. And I think while we found really strong engagement online with from our students, which was again really good, much better than we actually expected. We also found that the footfall, because we looked at the gate data, was pretty impressive as well. When they had the chance to come on campus, they wanted to come on campus. But I think what they get when they come on campus, it's all heightened, their expectation, and how they want to experience what their learning, their teaching and learning is really amplified. And I don't think we ought to miss that. They really want to understand, now that they can do a lot of studying at home, and particularly during COVID, why am I getting on a bus or a train and taking all these risks and coming on into university and coming onto campus? And I think that will still be the same, post-COVID, where a lot of stuff will be online and we'll be working with them in other ways, and they'll want a really good reason for why you're bringing them onto campus for face-to-face teaching. So I think it will really heighten the expectations, but I think they will then therefore perhaps be more engaged, because that's how we've experienced this during COVID. So I think there's been really good engagement online, really good engagement in terms of coming along for the face-to-face sessions. But one of the questions I had for the other members of the panel was their experiences with the professional and statutory and regulatory bodies, because that's the thing I think about our subjects, is that, often when we've tried to innovate, we've always been hit with this hammer of, oh, you couldn't possibly do that because the PSRBs won't have it, etc. And clearly that's started to change, because we've worked with them during this period of moving everything online, and universities having to do their assessments that work very, very differently. And I just wondered what the experiences around the table had been of the PSRBs.
Anatoly, would you like to answer that one, and then Catherine will come to you after that.
So in Faculty of Life Sciences and Medicine, we have 3 courses that are PSRB regulated. And so far we had a good relationship with the professional and statutory regulatory bodies. They are accommodating and they understand, but we hope that this is not a short kind of fix for them, and then they will go back next year and say we want everything back, because there's lots of positive that we learned this time, and we want to continue next year. So introducing various types of assessments, innovating in assessments is something that we would like to continue with, not just go to a written exam in the big hall with all students, unseen examination, for example.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, you were going to speak earlier.
Yeah, I sort of picking up particularly what Michael said, but I think other people have touched on it. I think what this does is make us ask ourselves, when we go back to whatever might be normal, how do we spend our time on campus with our students? I think it makes us re-ask that question and re-evaluate, and you know, the conversations that we're having are really about how we make that time about applied active learning, because we know we're getting really good feedback from the students around use of videos. We know that students are using them repeatedly where they're engaging with assessment, where they might not understand something. And so it really makes us re-evaluate that campus time.
Okay, thank you. We've had a huge amount of questions from people since we started. We've got about 250 people in the audience today, which probably explains why there are so many questions. I'm just conscious of the fact that we may not get a chance to answer all of them. So I'm going to try and start going through the questions a bit earlier, just so we can address some of them. Sarah Bailey asked from earlier, replicating practical laboratory teaching is a huge issue. Does the panel have any examples in the biological sciences of how they've been able to do this?
So,
Michael,
well, yeah, in our well, and I'm not, biology is not part of my faculty, so I don't have really very close information there. I can only sort of partly answer that. But certainly for some of the labs, to a limited amount, we are using some simulation system, Labster. And so, but we do work very hard also to get students back on campus into the labs, because we feel that a significant part of the experience cannot be substituted adequately with simulation technology in that area, especially sort of where it's about sort of chemical biology and sort of the connections to medicine. These areas, you know, you do need to get your hands dirty at some point. So we have found replacement only for a smaller part of the activities, but not for everything.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'll come to you in order. If you do Catherine, and then Amy, and then Anatoly after that, please.
Can't claim any background in biological sciences, but I did see a really good example at another institution of the use of Minecraft for building field trip activities for first year students, which was really good. I had a go at it. They had quite a lot of success with it. So it was really interesting to see that.
From my perspective, so I teach on a chemistry module as well. What we've ended up doing is we've reduced the number of physical labs, but there are still physical labs that take place. So there haven't been this term, but next term we will be getting the students back onto campus, obviously with social distancing. So they are still getting some hands-on experience within the lab, because we think it's crucial that they have that. We then obviously have the simulation software. So we have Labster, which we can use as kind of like a pre and post physical lab session kind of consolidation, and kind of building up their knowledge and understanding of what they're doing before they get in there, so that the time that they have in the lab is very much focused on being able to get a variety of different experiments done in the 3 hours that they're in there for that session.
Sorry, Anatoly, if I come to you next.
So I work in the Faculty of Life Sciences and Medicine. We look at practical sessions from the point of what's the learning outcome of each practical session and what students need to learn. So if they need to learn data analysis, then we shift them to online data analysis and using various online tools. We introduce Windows Virtual Desktop, so students have access to all softwares that require for data analysis online, and they can use any computers they have. They can even work on their mobile phone as they would work on a Windows computer. If they need to do or learn how to use pipettes and how to operate equipment, then we set up drop-in sessions for students with social distancing, so they can book the lab and they can go to the lab and practice, and then we change equipment, we clean everything, and then get another group of students. If they are to learn a concept of the practical, then we simulate that. So we use Labster, Learning Science, and we have some virtual simulation that we design ourselves. So they can practice full process from beginning to the end and learn a concept, what comes first, what comes second and third, and how to do the process. And fourth, we also video many real practicals from beginning to the end using technicians and our lectures, just to show students how it would be in real time from beginning to the end. And so it's not just a simple answer to the questions. It depends on the context and what really students need to learn. We try to look kind of at the picture from the different angles.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think there's Catherine, I'll come to you next. There is a related question that we've had that's come through, which is from Oscar Blanco, who is saying, are there any techniques or recommendations for accommodating students with different levels of access to devices and different internet connections? Again, this is something that we report on a lot through THE, is the issue of digital poverty and how it's not necessarily not being able to afford an iPad. It's perhaps also not having the space or the time to be able to study effectively, something which I imagine is exacerbated when you're talking about STEM subjects because of that need to be in a certain space. Sorry, Catherine, you were up to speak, and then Amy after that.
I'm going to confess to leaving my hand up from before.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah, nothing's ever perfect, is it? You know, everyone's having to be very quick on the button in addition to answering very complicated questions about things. So it's, I think it's fine. Amy and then Anatoly, maybe that'd be great. Thanks.
So touching on what Anatoly said about having videos of labs as well. So we've kind of utilised that for one aspect. So this is something that people can access asynchronously. So, you know, shorter videos that they can interact with, so it wouldn't technically take up potentially more, too much bandwidth and things like that. During the physical labs as well, we've been attempting to do some dual teaching. So whilst a physical lab is taking place in the lab, in the actual lab, we've had basically a video of it as well. So we've had one person manning the chat around that at the same time, and it's, you know, it's a work in progress, but it's a nice kind of step forward from that kind of perspective as well. All of these are obviously recorded, so if it's a case of, you know, someone being able to access a device, but they're limited as to when they can do it, so maybe they're sharing a laptop with other family members, then they've got access to this asynchronously as well, so they could still be seeing and be involved in what's taking place in that lab and kind of understand the learning that goes with that.
Okay, great, thank you. Christina, if I could come to you next, and then Michael, and then Anatoly coming around.
Yeah, this is something that we encounter from the vendor perspective and the industry perspective all the time, and it's a very hard challenge to go through. You want to balance providing the technology so that students can have an engaging and interactive experience, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it's equitable across wherever you are. In Canada in particular, we're a Canadian company, we have regions that have very low bandwidth access to internet. So the ability to make sure that we provide a low footprint, to make sure that the access allows for the professor or the instructor to decide that a student has maybe a lot more time to complete an assignment. So instead of banding it at 30 minutes or 40 minutes, they can allow a little bit more depending on where they are. And we found that some of our customers, some of the universities that we work with have created transcripts that go along with the videos to accommodate those types of things as well, because of the same reasons that bandwidth might make the video choppy and make it very difficult to watch. So I think there's a lot more work for us to do. There's a lot more work for us to do to make sure that it's available to everyone. But I think that the technology that's coming forward and the type of other partners that we've been working with are allowing us to think a little bit more outside the box and get more creative to make sure we can get our arms all of these students, because there's very diverse view on what their ability is and what their accessibility is to this technology.
Yeah, and I think a broader point of once you can increase the diversity of your cohort and also your teaching staff, then the possibilities are endless, really. Michael, if I come to you next, please. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. The question of this inclusivity and not disadvantaging students that have maybe not the same technology or not the same learning environment or so. I mean, that they are really important questions. Ultimately, there will never be a perfect solution. It will remain a tension because we should strive, of course, to do this as well as we can. And it is important that we always keep that in mind. And there are some things that are reasonably easy to do. And that is that in the delivery, we concentrate mostly on asynchronous material, recorded material that doesn't have to be watched in real time, so that there is not a reliance on internet connection at a certain time or at a certain speed, and to deliver the material in shorter chunk, not deliver a 2-hour lecture videos in a way which technically gets much harder to download. And and at our university also, we have a program where students can request laptops or Wi-Fi dongles if they are in a situation where they do not have availability at home. And so to a certain extent, we can do things and we must do things. But then there are tensions. For example, we do have some live events and we had quite extended discussions whether they should be recorded or not. And of course, for sort of inclusivity, it would be good to have them recorded if someone has technical challenges. But we also know that for many of our students, it is actually to their detriment if they're recorded, because a lot of our students are quite young. They don't have a good study discipline yet. They procrastinate, and they know if something's recorded, then they will say, okay, I'll watch that tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll watch it next week. And then they try to binge watch everything in the 2 days before the final examinations. And we know it doesn't work. We know it damages their learning. So we want to have some points where we actually try to make them work continuously, where we try to get continuous engagement. And one of the techniques is to have live sessions that they do not watch recorded, where they're actually expected to do things in real time. And there's a tension, of course, then with the accessibility. And there will never be a perfect solution. Both are valid considerations. And then the greatest challenge in my mind is when it comes to online examinations, because examinations by definition have to be at a certain fixed time. And we have discussed extensively what we do to not disadvantage students who have say, technically less strong environments. In some subjects, we went to offering a 24-hour window for a 2-hour examination where they can start at any time in those 24-hour windows. But then there is a tension always between being flexible for the benefit of the students and the danger of collusion between students, and how we police that and try to ensure still the integrity of the exams. There is an intrinsic tension there that we can have many interesting discussions about that. And the decisions in different subjects have come out differently in our university.
Thank you, Mike. We've had 4 or 5 questions about best practice for assessment, so I think we will move on to that. Neil, I see you've got your hand raised, so I'd like to come to you next, please. I'm
just going to talk about assessments, actually, Alistair. I was just picking up off what Michael was saying, because actually, to me, that's the next big thing that needs to be figured out, because if we're moving to a world where we're monitoring students learning far more by what they're picking up from what material we're putting up, and the quizzes and the formative stuff that they're doing online all the time, then dragging them into a 3-hour closed exam paper doesn't seem to be a particularly progressive way of actually assessing what the students have learned and those learning outcomes, because we've got a lot of data on the students, or could potentially have a lot of data on what the student has already learned. So I think that's the next big push with blended learning, is to try and open the conversation about how we then assess. I mean, what Michael was talking about is great. I mean, it's exactly what's gone on at my institution, which is the question of how you move what we were doing last year to a COVID situation where we have to try and assess the students. So how do you move the 2-hour closed paper online? Well, yes, there were discussions about whether you still have 2 hours, whether you had 24 hours, and what about the person that's in different time zones, and all of those issues. And do we proctor, do we not proctor? All of those were issues of how to move a 500-year-old assessment process into a virtual world. And I think that now we've sort of probably got past most of the hard work now with sort of moving all the learning and teaching and assessment online. I think we need to open up that assessment question again. And if COVID has sort of forced us to think in a different way and go over to blended learning, then we have to rethink the way that we actually assess those students.
Great, thank you, Neil. Christina, you have your hand raised. I'll come to you next, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to extend what Neil was saying, and obviously what Michael said as well. The assessment side of things, there's the micro, low stakes assessment that happens at every lesson to make sure that they can understand what they've done, introduce some desirable difficulties so that the student can get a little bit more into understanding the topics. But what happens with the high stakes, big exams? And in every panel, every conversation I've had with institutions, it's the same question. Do we still need to do it this way? And I think in some cases, the jury's out on that. There's still some understanding to understand if we do need to have these high stakes tests at the end. A lot of good conversation is happening around how do we rethink and reimagine the pedagogy around STEM learning so that we have bigger projects in between, group work, different types of ways to assess student learning throughout the course of their education, and then decide if a high stakes test at the end is the right approach. It's a difficult position from the vendor perspective because we're thought leaders in the technology side, but you're the experts in the best way to ensure that a student gets the education. So how do we now take the lead from our partners in education and also take the lead on the technology side where we can marry them together to make sure we get the right approach and the right experience for students? It's something that we quote unquote geek out on this all the time because there's wonderful technology out there where we have a lot of fun working with and experimenting. But I think there's a lot that we can learn from the experiences that people have had right now and how we take that to the next step.
I just had one other question from you. So in terms of the solutions that Digital Ed's working with its partners to provide, do you anticipate a diversity in the type of assessment, the type of courses that you're going to have to offer in the STEM sector? You said there are, sort of the low stakes and the high stakes assessment. Is there a direction of travel with that? Do you think it will diversify further? Will it be tied closer to things like PSRE bodies, or is it more about, will there be developments around teaching the kind of soft skills that are complementary to the sort of the hard knowledge-based STEM courses? What do you anticipate, and have you seen any shift already?
I've seen a lot of shift in visual recognition of people, of the social aspects of this, actually, which is interesting for us. We focus very much on math. That's our core. That's where our bread and butter have been for quite some time, and we're quite powerful in that area with our technology. But this needs to extend beyond that. There's been a couple of comments already with the rest of the panel around the social interaction and the ability to have to communicate complex topics from an engineering aspect or from a STEM aspect. I've seen a lot of technology companies come to us saying we have a way to assess a student's physical attributes as they're speaking to identify if they've actually learned something or if they've memorized something. Those have a lot of problematic elements associated with it that we still need to think about what happens on diversity and understanding the types of things that people look at when it comes to facial recognition. And then there's the high stakes proctoring side of things. We're on an interesting place where we can provide restrictions on browsers and make sure that students aren't clicking on a bunch of different areas from their websites and different technology that they're bringing up on their computers. But looking at how someone's going to assess how a student speaks and how well they're going to convey an idea and have that assessed in a technology perspective is a very problematic area for me right now. And I think that from the technology decision aspect, we need to work a lot harder on that. But I do see a lot of movement there, quite a bit actually. There's blockchain elements and security elements that are come into play with technology to try to secure a student from an academic integrity perspective and make sure that that student is the one that's taking that test. I think that takes us down a path that might be difficult for students and puts on a tougher experience for them to actually learn. It puts more stress than they actually need to learn. Probably took that a little bit further than you had expected as a question, but there's a lot of parts there that came from
that. No, I mean, I think you raise a good point about sort of the security aspect of it. I don't think we've really got time to go into a lot of detail on it today, but again, it's just another huge logistical challenge for institutions going forward. Amy, if we can come to you next, and then Michael after that, please.
So we learned quite a lot from, obviously COVID hit when we were in the end of the second teaching period, so we did have to shift a lot of the assessments to that online format. So a lot has been done around that. We go for a couple of different varieties. You can still obviously have the ability for students to do presentations, so it's you kind of get around a plagiarism issue there, because you can have still these presentations, whether it's through Microsoft Teams or your VLE. You can see that they are delivering that. You can ask them questions around it. It's still very much interactive in that sense. So that's one way to get around that. We've also integrated so that we're hitting the inclusivity side of things. They are available for 24 hours, but we do have some timed assessments in there. So within those, they are built within the VLE, and we create pools of questions. So it's not the case of all students will have exactly the same questions. It's a lot of hard work, and, you know, massive praise to our team for putting this together. But it does get around some of that collusion and plagiarism issues as well, because you know that different students are getting different questions, so you're not having as much of, it's not perfect, but you know, it's a nice sort of start there. And then in terms of having 24-hour open book assessments, they're becoming a lot more application based, so it's not something where you're just regurgitating things like definitions and things. They have to show an understanding behind it.
Great, thank you, Amy. Michael, if I come to you next, please. Oh, sorry, you're on mute again. It's
every single time. I've done that 3 times now.
All right.
Anyway, I'd like to comment also on the question of assessment, because I think it's a really interesting one. The online proctoring. I think if we think about automatic, sort of machine-supported proctoring, it does have a role, but I am intrinsically skeptical. Where there's AI techniques with facial recognition, and I think there's no end of problems that we could have a whole panel on ourselves. And also our most recent fully online course, for example, is computer security, and those students are tech savvy, and they don't, even if you have a lockdown browser that locks down their system, they have virtual machines installed. They've got multiple operating systems running on their machine in parallel. They have one key press and they're in their Linux system, which is completely open, and while their Windows system is locked down at the same time, there are ways around it, and they know them. So I think it's futile to assume that a remote exam without in-person proctoring is invigilated. It isn't. It never will be. The only solution in my mind, and that's sort of my personal view, we don't necessarily have agreement institution-wide on that, but my personal view is the only way forward is to diversify assessment and to de-emphasize one final high-stakes assessment, get away from the sort of single exam or really big exam at the end, have more continuous assessment, and have techniques how we have much more practice-based work and assessment. And of course, there is then again tensions. We have in STEM courses often really large student numbers, and the main objection from colleagues is the workload of assessing this. So we need better education and techniques of maybe peer assessment, of techniques that take the load of the staff member, but offer a continuous experience where students do that. There's also tension because we are wondering whether we are over-assessing, whether we are, and so we've been talking before about, reducing the amount of assessment because we are over-assessing and causing stress through over-assessment. And now if we're talking about diversifying, we are talking about creating more assessment. So we have to be careful there. So maybe a solution is to look at program level assessment, that we have larger projects across multiple modules so that we can have more embedded, realistic assessment in the discipline while reducing the number of assessment points. And so there are, in the literature, there are methods to do these kinds of things, and we need to look at, I think, the state-of-the-art literature for diversifying and more intelligent forms of assessment, including involving the students and having student-led activities in assessment.
Great, thank you, Michael. I just say this, I've chaired several discussions over the summer. This is the first time I've heard about students switching to a Linux system being a problem. So it seems that perhaps computer science students require extra careful proctoring for their exams. They obviously have a level of expertise that isn't a concern for certain other disciplines, but it's certainly interesting to hear that. Thank you. I'll come to Catherine next and then Hanifa after that. I mean, we've got about 10 minutes left. It's going to be tight for time, but I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the teacher training and support that Michael touched on slightly, and then if we've got time, maybe say something about internationalism. But Catherine, if we come to you next, please.
Yeah, just really quickly, programme level assessment is something that we're in the process of introducing. I think changing the way we do assessment, it's a really big piece of work to get a sort of a course-wide approach that really works. But for me, I think we have to look out to industry for some of the inspiration around this. In STEM courses, in lots of practice-based courses, we want authenticity, and we need to look at what industry's been doing while we've been in lockdown and during COVID to get some of our inspiration for that. And I'm just starting an institution-wide project to look at how we provide guidance around assessment to try and get more innovation around there, because I think unless we centrally start to provide that impetus, that guidance, this is how to, we might not get the change. I think we've got to bring it from both sides, both from the people who are on the ground teaching, but from the institution itself to get us to a different place.
Great, thank you. Hanifa, if I can come to you, and then Anatoly after that, please.
Really just a quick point. So I think the answer to, how do we assess will, I think, come from the changes to teaching and learning and the way that technology develops to support teaching and learning. So as that changes and as there's more automation around how the learner is supported, I think there you have your opportunity for how do you assess competencies, how do you assess capability, and how do you assess knowledge. So I think it will come from the changes. The lecture as we once knew it no longer exists. And I think assessment as we once knew them won't exist. And I think it will be driven through how the tech supports teaching and learning. And therefore, there's the opportunity, if there's an opportunity for the technology to be giving feedback to learners, to giving learners an understanding of where their learning is, well, therein lies, I think, the answer for how assessment in the future could very much grow out of that.
Great, thank you very much. Anatoly, you'd like to go next, and then Amy after that, please.
Just want to say three aspects: knowledge, skills, and behavior. So future for knowledge is adaptive learning and progressive assessment. Skills, future for skills is problem-based learning, and behavior is team-based learning and team-based assessment. But technology is developing rapidly, and we will see a shift in the way we teach and we assess students in the future. And you mentioned international students. International students are tech savvy as well, and they are up to speed with technology. And some countries have better developed technology in some aspects than we have in terms of, for example, face recognition. So if we embrace internationalism, we can have a much better higher education in the future here.
Thank you. Amy?
So mine's linking to the new question around sort of training and support. Obviously, any new software or new idea or innovation that comes in obviously needs proper training. But there's also the consideration of, obviously, with this shift to online, support from a kind of a well-being perspective as well. You know, we talk about making sure that these students have got these networks, can communicate, can build these relationships, but actually, are we considering the staff as well? You know, we've gone from being very much on campus, being able to just pop down to an office and ask someone a question. Now it's very much kind of a lot more isolated, and it's making sure that our staff are supported in that sense as well, making sure that they have got these networks and abilities to kind of interact with other people. I think we're very lucky that we have a very kind of supportive team, and we do have a lot of interactions, you know, down to even just a WhatsApp group, just checking in and making sure that we're okay. I'm actually a mental health first aid champion, so this is kind of a big area that I'm interested in. And I'd be interested in kind of finding out what any of the other panelists think about this. Have your departments got anything in place to be able to support your staff's well-being?
Yeah, so that is another measure that comes up quite a lot, is also the, you know, how do you, as much as you build new systems for staff and students, there's also the monitoring the well-being of both as they pass through the system, not least because it can help with attrition rates and also perhaps give you a bit more data in terms of how people are choosing to study, how people are choosing to teach. There was quite an interesting example on an event that I chaired yesterday, where somebody from an institution was talking about how they were actually just monitoring who had actually logged into the systems and who hadn't. And by using that one simple metric, by reaching out to those students and checking to see if they were engaged, to see if there were any sort of broader wellbeing problems that needed to engage with them about, they were able to massively boost engagement amongst their first year students year on year. So I think sometimes it can be, from what I've heard, as simple as simply checking to see who is logging on and who is engaging and who is completing units and who isn't. But again, it is, as we've spoken about, there are these several sort of huge overarching issues that are very difficult to tackle, because you have so many different learner profiles, so many different student profiles, different teacher profiles, and you're trying to serve and support all of them. Christina, just as we round out, I was wondering if I could come to you to talk about internationalism a little bit, in terms of whether you've seen any changing trends in terms of international collaboration, either through the platform directly that DigiCert offers, or whether there's increasing demand for international collaboration to start taking a different form when we talk about STEM subjects. Perhaps it's sharing research through fieldwork, because that becomes harder to coordinate, or whether just the breaking down of barriers means that international collaboration can really go from strength to strength going forward.
I'd say that at the immediate term, just with everyone at the rush to get into a remote learning type environment, the sharing of lessons was incredible. A lot of people have been wonderfully gracious with, oh, I've already done some of this online. Do you need some lessons in some of these basic elements that you can now edit? And that's part of what we've tried to encourage with the platform, that making sure that whatever we offer is editable so that you can refine it and change it, but it's a good starting point to help share across. We've found certain clusters of schools. We have what we call a Nordic cloud, for example. The Nordics are wonderful at making sure that they share with one another. So within each institution, if they have a specific core courses, they want to share them from that aspect. And they've been very good at keeping that community going. One part that I think is difficult is that there's certain core elements that are very easily shared. So that's something that we see everywhere, but the curriculum in China we've seen is different than the curriculum that we've seen in Australia, which is different in Canada, and we've seen a little bit of a difference in what's happening in the UK as well. So while everyone has this really good desire to help one another and kind of raise each other up when they're struggling to develop these materials, we have inherent differences in our curricula that make it so that things look familiar, but there's some tweaks that need to be done in order to make sure it fits the right curriculum for those courses to be completed. So I think altogether, everyone has the right intent. I've seen nothing but really good intent with everyone sharing what the content is. There is sometimes this feeling of, oh gosh, that looked really good until I got into it. It doesn't quite fit everything that I'm looking for. And that's why we've spent a lot more time looking at how do we provide more of these starting points and make it easier to edit and refine and kind of customize it. because the thought of taking a curriculum from one school even to another one, there's going to be changes, and that needs to be something that we look at from the sharing side. But language-wise, I haven't seen a lot of push for that, which is interesting to me. We just opened up Digital Ed India, and they're fine with our English language materials, and they want to run with that as much as well. So we haven't seen a lot of push for that other than in China.
Okay, thank you. We're almost at time, and I'm aware that several people have 2 p.m. meetings that they have to get to, unfortunately. But I just wanted to thank the panel so much, because I think we've got through a huge amount of discussion over the last 60 minutes, and I've certainly found it really informative. I hope that you found it a useful forum to exchange ideas with your peers on best practice. We've had about 200 people join us today, so there's been a very large audience who've been interested, and they've been bombarding us with questions throughout. So I apologise to the audience that I haven't been able to get through all of the questions, but I just want to say thank you again to everyone for taking part in the panel today. Thank you for Digital Ed for partnering with us on this event, and also thank you to everybody who attended. It's been a pleasure.